Today we're talking about anxiety. So anxiety is something that is rampant out there, and many of you felt anxiety. You felt these anxious feelings. Have you ever got caught up in a fear about a health crisis, or you start to worry that your heart's going to explode if you jog very far, and it's kind of like you really feel like it's going to happen, or you feel numb or tingling in your fingers and you're pretty sure you're having a brain aneurysm and your mind just runs with it. If you felt those feelings of anxiety, or if you felt like this fear that you're going to get trapped in a supermarket line where you can't get out of the line because people are in front of you and behind you, if you have those chronic fears that persist and you wake up in a cold sweat and you wake up with your mind spinning out of control, there's really several mindfulness tools that you can use. There's different types of hypnosis, self-hypnosis that you can do, some visual imagery that you can do. But overarching all of these, I believe there's one tool that we all need to become resilient enough to use, and it's a tool that requires some bravery on our part or on your part if you're facing this. And I know all of you are brave. I know all of you are resilient. I know you can handle things. This is a counterintuitive tool that is often looked at as like, well, no way, not going to do that. One time, this author, an expert in anxiety, David Burns, he writes this in one of his books, and so I'm assuming it's true. He has this audience of people, and he's talking to them about anxiety, and he wills out this treadmill. And there's a person that has approached him on one of the breaks and said that she was just deathly afraid of jogging because she worried that her heart would explode. And so he got a treadmill out there and he put her on the treadmill and he started the treadmill going and he turned up the speed and then he turned up the speed and she's panicking a little bit, but he invites her to just keep going. And so she keeps going. Her heart rate's going up and up and up, and she's at aerobic, and she just keeps going. And finally, he lets her off the hook and he slows it down and stops it. And he asked her, "Did your heart explode?" And she goes, "No." And he goes, "Would you like to try it again?" She goes, "Yeah." And so she got back on the treadmill, went. The idea is she gradually faced that fear on the treadmill, going a little bit quicker and a little bit quicker, heart rate up a little bit higher, up a little bit higher, and proved to herself that her heart wouldn't magically explode just from jogging on a treadmill. Now, super happy that she didn't have a heart attack during the demonstration because that would have ruined the example. The idea is face your fears head on. And there's some wisdom that we need to use, and then we'll talk about that in just a minute. But the idea of facing fear is an old idea. We've all heard, you if you fall off a horse, get right back on the horse. If you fall off your bike, get right back on your bike. So there's wisdom in this. There's ancient wisdom in facing your fears. There's this idea that like like what's going on here, and is am I really having an aneurysm if my fingertips tingle? Well, there might be a concern, but does it have to go clear to I'm going to have an exploding aneurysm in my head? Does it have to go clear there? And I think many of us know that when we're in the middle of these fears, cognitively up here, we know they're irrational, but down here somewhere, um, there's a certain amount of rational involved in it. I remember being really young in this house in Idaho. It's this really desolate area of Idaho where there's only like two or three neighbors for miles, and nighttime would scare me. And I had these older siblings that would tease me for being afraid of everything, afraid of the dark, afraid of the wind, afraid of the rain, afraid of thunder. And so I'd get teased enough that one day I decided, okay, first I'm going to lock myself in this long hallway. There's this hallway in our house that went from the living room down to the one bathroom, and there's bedrooms on both sides of the hallway. And so I would close all the bedroom doors and close the bathroom door, jump in there, close the door to the living room because it weirdly had a door on it to go to the living room, and stand there in the dark until my heart rate went down. And I did that enough that it didn't bother me anymore. And then I went down into our basement, this weird, creepy, cement encased basement with a water pump in it. And sometimes the water pump would overflow and it'd be like an inch of water across, and there'd be rats and skunks and porcupines. And all kinds of critters running around. It was this is Idaho back in the the 70s and late 60s, and so it wasn't real pretty down there, and it was like spooky. And so I went and locked myself down there in the dark and just hung out there until I had my heart rate down. I could just easily kind of like wander around in the dark and hope I didn't kick a porcupine. So that desensitization to the fear, getting my heart rate down while facing the fear of dark, it worked. And so really early on, our natural instinct is to look at facing our fears. Now, we need to ask ourselves the question, is my fear or anxiety protecting me? If I'm out camping and I'm in a tent and I hear scratching around, and I know the shadow of a bear and the bear's like pawing at the tent, I probably should feel anxious. I should feel that fight or flight. Um, if I need to get up super early in the morning and it's an unusual time for me to get up, and I feel a little bit of anxiety, so that as I go to sleep, just a little bit of like worry that what if I sleep through my alarm, actually helps me to hear my alarm and wake up. So a little bit of anxiety gets us off the couch moving. A little bit of anxiety can protect us when we should run or maybe even fight if there's a serious enough attempt at our physical safety. So there is wisdom in just take a second, and are you at a crossroads of an irrational fear, or are you at the crossroads of something that ought to be scary? And I believe that almost always we know whether it's irrational or not irrational. So this idea of this big fear of the unknown, or a big fear of a health concern, a big fear of some disaster that is in our minds imminent. um, many kids report this when their parents go out on date night. They're afraid their parents are going to get in an accident, afraid their parents might not come back. And so that fear is irrational, because time after time their parents do come back and they don't get in an accident. Now we all know the reality is there could be an accident, there could be some tragic thing happen. So what we want to do is face that fear, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to face that fear. And so if you're ready, we're going to jump into what I call a little bit of brain judo. We're going to do this whole roll with resistance idea, where we stop thinking through the lens of, if it's an irrational fear, just try not to think about it. Have you ever tried to not think about something? I want you to stop thinking about a sunrise. Stop thinking about a a pink elephant right now. Stop thinking about that pink elephant. I don't want you to think about it. Kick it out of your mind. Take it off the stage of your mind. And I want you to try really hard not to think of pink elephants or sunrises. Okay. The more you try, the more persistent. It's literally um, like by opposing the natural flow of a thought, we invite the return of that thought that we're resisting. If we try to oppose maybe the natural fear of someone getting in an accident, then the more we oppose that thought, the more we try to kick that thought out, the more we resist that thought, the more that thought persists, the more it comes back in. So the adage that many say, Carl Jung said this first. I can't find where he actually said it, but Carl Jung may have said, what we resist persists. And so the idea of resisting a fear probably is making that fear persist. It makes that fear just intensify, even makes that fear like turn into this ruminating, almost keep us awake all night deal, where we get wired, we're starting to feel stressed out, we have this sense of doom, this sense of dread, this almost certainty that we're going to fail at something, we're going to die, or we're going to do irreparable damage to our families and loved ones. And so the torment of this ruminating over a fear, the torment of trying to stuff that fear down somewhere in our bodies so we don't have to think about it or kick it off the stage of our mind, the torment of trying to do that just probably makes the fear grow from like a little baby fear to a big monstrous full-on adult fear. And so if we're not going to resist the thought, if we're not going to like fight the thought, what are we going to do instead? Well, what we do is we don't resist it. Let it let it flow into your mind, let it take hold. create actually a clear picture of it in your mind. So embrace the thought, hit it head on, literally turn towards the fear. That's counterintuitive, right? So I'm afraid for a second that I might have a brain aneurysm, or I'm afraid just for a second that my wife might get in an accident because she's driving to her primary activity with the stake alone. That's Mormon talk for a group of people that are in charge of kids' activities and such. And so she's there, and I'm here at the house worried that she might get in an accident, trying not to think about it. Well, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and I get more and more afraid. Well, what if I turn towards it and face it? And it's a horrible thought, a brain aneurysm or an accident happening to a loved one that causes harm. So if I turn towards it and embrace it, though, if I say to myself, all right, the reality is it could happen. That's the reality. So if it's a possibility, and if I'm going to hit it head on, then I'm going to like literally face that fear, and I'm going to ask myself, what will I do today if it happens? So if I get that phone call and there's an accident, or if I get that phone call from a doctor's assistant and there's some health malady, what will I do today if an accident happens? What will I do today if there's a health issue going on in my body? What steps will I actually take if it's true? So if I get a call that my wife's been in an accident, number one, I'll find out where she's at and I'll get to where she's at. Number two, I'll get the best medical advice possible. Number three, I might even need to get the best legal advice possible. Number four, now see, as I'm creating this step-by-step plan, literally as I thought about my wife being in an accident, you know, my wife that I cherish, that I really need in my life, I want in my life, my heart rate starts going down as I think about the accident. It goes up even when I'm doing a video about it. So as I create this, okay, I'm going to get the best medical advice, the best legal advice. I'm going to get the best care and help for her. Heaven forbid if there's irreparable harm, I'm going to, one of my first thoughts is like, what if she ends up in a wheelchair? Well, I'm building ramps at every place where she needs to have a ramp to get into our house. I'm considering selling this 3-story house to build a rambler that's 1 story. All of a sudden, my mind can go to these step-by-step plans. As you create the step-by-step plan, what you do is you notice your heart rate going down. And so if you will take steps, if it's actually true, if you take the step of how do I explain this accident or this health malady to my family, how do I generate a plan for the what ifs, you'll notice the anxiety reducing. So you see how hitting this anxiety head on and just developing a plan, your brain goes away from helpless, uncontrollable fear where everything else is in charge, and you literally become the person in charge. You become powerful in your mind, and you have this plan that calms you because you know you can do that. What our brains dislike, what our, every one of us, what our brains rebel against is the unknown and the lack of a strategy, lack of a plan. If you're just going in circles, I can't do anything, I can't do, I'm helpless, I'm helpless, I'm helpless. Well, that's anxiety. Anxiety is all about feeling helpless and powerless. The more helpless and powerless we feel, the more anxious we feel, which is why chronically anxious people have lots of rules for people around them. They try to control the external circumstance instead of managing the internal fears. And so projecting out and trying to avoid by making rules doesn't work, but projecting in and doing what you know you can do actually lowers anxiety. All right, so avoiding fear can increase the anxiety. Challenge you to attempt that the more you attempt to avoid, the more the anxiety is going to persist and grow. The more you give yourself permission to feel your fear and face it, literally face it head on, embrace it, the more safe you're going to feel, the more in power you're going to feel. Okay, and so think through that lens. Think about avoidance is really unproductive. And if you think about rational fears, if you just try to cover your head with your sleeping bag if there's a bear scratching at your tent, that's not going to help. If you start thinking about a way to get out the back of your tent and into your truck, that's going to help. And so avoiding irrational fear is much the same. And so avoidance actually reinforces the fear. So fear is literally this midbrain um, amygdala part of your brain, this structure in your brain that only has one function. It's like pain and pleasure, safety or not safety. And so the bigger that midbrain is, the more potent or powerful the triggering is. And so if you um, if you are in a crisis, or if you are just maybe a short story, the Boston Marathon had that bombing a number of years ago. It's been a lot of years ago now. It still feels like yesterday to me. My wife ran in that marathon, and I was at the finish line waiting for her where the second bomb went off. And watching people and their behavior just for a split second as that second bomb went off. At the next half hour, you notice um, there was like 20 or 30 pairs of like shoes, sandal-like slip-ons, laying on the street with no person by them. You wonder, well, what's going on there? Well, people that were in flight mode kick off their shoes and ran. Any shoes that were like loose that felt like might hinder them, they would kick them off and just run. So they had the fight or flight. They were the flight. Then you had people that would like look for something to do, like take care of somebody that's laying in the street. I went and helped this kid that was bleeding from a leg by putting a coat under his head and talked to him until the ambulance driver came. So there's people that search for something to do. Um, there's other people that just stood and stared. So fight, flight, or freeze was evident at that bombing. And people do one of three things when they're in that fear, fight or flight or freeze phase of their brain being triggered. And so we do that with everything. If we have this real or imagined fear, our brains really do go into this real sensitive fight or freeze mode. So knowing that about all of us, and it's all of us, will do one of those things in a crisis. The more intense the crisis, the more intense the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism is intact there, and that's all managed by this small little portion of your brain right in the middle that triggers safety or not safety, pain or pleasure. And so we're pretty powerful. And so I want you to think about how powerful your brain is. Um, your brain's powerful enough that you can look at a scene like the finish line at the Boston Marathon. You can look at that scene and you can tell pretty quickly what's going on. When the first bomb went off, most of us clear down where the second bomb was looking up the street to the finish line proper, seeing smoke in that. And I thought it was just pyrotech, like fireworks at the finish line. And I thought, man, that was a little bit too big and billowing smoke. And I literally had this thought, somebody's going to get fired because it didn't go well. And then the second bomb goes off, and you realize, oh, there's a threat here. There's a terrorist attack here, or there's bombs going off. All of a sudden, your brain registers what's going on, and you create this fight, flight, or freeze, or a plan, and you take action, you freeze, or you run. And so the idea of if in a real live event, all of that is a very natural occurrence. Well, this is how powerful your brain is. If you're laying in your bed, safe and sound, and you fly awake, and you are now thinking, I think I think I've got an aneurysm. And you start to picture having an aneurysm. You start to picture like all the hospital visits, all the maybe even brain surgery, and you picture them shaving your head and marking with black magic marker the portion of your head they're going to drill into. Or you start to imagine being in the checkout line at Walmart, and there's people behind you talking to you, people in front of you asking you questions you don't know the answer to, and you start to, like, while laying in your bed safe and sound, your heart rate starts to go up. Your mouth goes dry. You start to sweat in your armpits. You start to feel like, I got to get out of here. I got to get out of here. Or you start to freeze. See, you can imagine a scene and it will become as physiologically and emotionally real as if you were standing at the finish line at the Boston Marathon bombing. So your brain is powerful enough that if you can imagine it intensely enough and drive that anxiety to the midbrain fight or flight, if you can imagine it, your body physiologically and your emotional response will manage it just as if you were there in real time. So if you're that powerful, why not harness it? So if you're that powerful, if you're comfortably laying in your bed and that anxiety starts to creep up and you're picturing intensely enough that you're in the middle of a death-inducing or a pain-inducing crisis and it works, your body takes off like it is. Your body goes into fight or flight. You start to have all the symptoms of it physiologically. You start to like emotionally feel that panic set in. Well, if we face our fear head on, and if we, in the middle of that panic, again, we're laying comfortably in our beds, we're safe. The house isn't burning down. We got maybe our spouse right next to us snoring just a little bit, hopefully not a lot. And then, and yet we're transported into a crisis. Well, what if we face that head on and harness the power of belief that we can make a plan, that we can make we can build a strategy that will actually work if we're fearing death. We, as horrific and as counterintuitive as it sounds, we map out how to talk with our family about it, how to talk with our doctors about it, how to search for solutions, how to look for alternative cares. What witch doctor or shaman am I going to go to? What other medical professional am I going to go to? I mean, just whatever works for you, you start creating a strategy or a plan. Well, if you're in the middle of a irrational fear, facing it head on and creating a plan. If you're in the middle of a fear that's not happening but actually could happen, like an accident of someone that you love, or maybe you getting in an accident, and you create a plan of how you're going to manage it, like I can wear a seatbelt, I can drive defensively, I can put the speed limit on, I can set my um, cruise control to a safe speed and all that. So I'm making this plan to hit this fear head on. All of a sudden, my brain treats it the same as the irrational fear that I let get out of control. I picture me being strong, powerful, and capable. Midbrain doesn't respond negatively to strong, powerful, and capable. It actually sends the message that you can go out of fight or flight mode. You don't have to freeze. We have a plan. There's something going on here that's going to work. So harnessing this power that you believe you can create a plan, that you believe that there's a strategy that makes sense, that you can figure out the crisis, then your brain goes out of fight or flight mode, out of freeze mode, and it starts to literally have this resilient, powerful feel that dissipates the anxiety out of your soul, and a sense of worth and power enters in your soul, and you move forward through your day. And you might need to do that multiple times a day. That's okay. Resilience is built by experiencing difficult things or imagining the experience of difficult things. Resilience is built by becoming more capable, competent, and powerful in either scenario. So here's the mantra. I literally hit my fears and anxieties head on by being curious instead of using fear and avoidance. That's the mantra. I hit my fears and anxieties head on. I use the tool of curiosity, strategic planning, instead of the tools of fear and avoidance and stuffing. That's the mantra. Give that a try. Let me know if it works. Put some comments in the comment. That's just one tool of many. There's mindfulness tools, visual imagery tools, self-hypnosis, hypnosis. There's talk therapy. But I'm telling you, this might save you a decade of talk therapy. And speaking from a therapist that does talk therapy, I don't know why I'm teaching you that, but there you have it. And we'll talk to you again.